If you feel like you are hitting an invisible ceiling no matter how hard you work, you are running on corrupted software. I'm going to walk you through a complete mindset factory reset to locate hidden mental blocks and permanently delete the scripts sabotaging your growth. Because some of you are not failing from lack of effort. You are failing from hidden programming. And that is what makes this so frustrating. You read the books, you set the goals, you try again, you get disciplined for a week, maybe a month. You build momentum. You start feeling like this time might finally be different, and then somehow, right when things begin moving, something inside you pulls the brake. Not outside you, inside you. You procrastinate for no clear reason. You suddenly lose focus. You talk yourself out of the next step. You shrink right before visibility. You go numb right before commitment. Then afterward you sit there, trying to make sense of it, telling yourself maybe you just were not ready. But what if that is not the truth? What if you were ready, but your inner system was not updated enough to let you stay in that new level? That is the invisible ceiling, the limit you cannot always see, but you keep colliding with. It is not always a lack of talent, not always bad timing, not always laziness. Sometimes it is an internal script that still believes success is unsafe, visibility is dangerous, peace is temporary, and growth will cost you love. That kind of script does not announce itself loudly. It does not always sound like sabotage. Sometimes it sounds reasonable. Maybe later. I should wait until I'm more prepared. What if I do all this and it still does not work? Let me fix a few more things first. That sounds cautious. That sounds mature. But in many cases, it is hidden resistance wearing the mask of wisdom. So let me ask you something directly. What goal did you abandon this year? Not the one you said did not matter. The one that still bothers you when the room gets quiet. The one you secretly wanted. The one that came alive in you for a moment before fear, delay, doubt, distraction, or self-negotiation slowly buried it. Was it the business, the channel, the move, the body you wanted to build? The thing you said you would launch after one more week of preparation? Be honest. Where did you stop because something in you started whispering? This is getting too real, because that whisper matters. That is not random. That is the software showing itself. And here is where many people lose years. They keep increasing effort without examining programming. They work harder inside the same mental prison. They optimize habits without confronting identity. They try to produce breakthrough with a system still built to avoid it. And that is why hard work becomes exhausting when the internal code is corrupted. Hard work is useless with bad software. That is the twist. You can be disciplined and still self-sabotage. You can be gifted and still loop. You can be hungry for more and still unconsciously protect the very ceiling you say you want to break. Because effort does not override programming by itself. It amplifies whatever system is already running underneath. If the hidden script says, "I always fall off," then effort becomes a setup for collapse. If the hidden script says, "People like me do not win big," then opportunity starts triggering guilt instead of focus. If the hidden script says it is safer not to be fully seen, then right when the door opens, your own nervous system will start trying to close it. And that is why some of you do not just fear failure. You fear what success would expose. Responsibility, attention, expectation, change, the death of the old identity. Because once the ceiling breaks, you cannot keep telling yourself the old story. Now you would have to become someone new. Now you would have to stop hiding behind almost. Now you would have to face the fact that the biggest thing standing in your way may not be the world. It may be the unchallenged script inside your own mind. That realization can sting, but it is also powerful. Because once the ceiling becomes visible, it stops being mystical. Now it can be traced. Now it can be named. Now it can be interrupted. Let us make this painfully practical. Self-sabotage is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is tiny. You finally get a clear hour to work on what matters, and suddenly you decide now is the time to reorganize your notes. You are about to send the pitch, and you start rewriting one sentence for 40 minutes. You get close to a bold move, and suddenly you need everybody's opinion. You say you want more money, but you keep underpricing yourself because charging more makes your chest tighten. You say you want peace, but you keep choosing chaos that feels familiar. That is what sabotage looks like in real life. Not always destruction, delay, distortion, deflection, a hidden hand pulling you back toward the level your subconscious still recognizes as safe. And no, your brain is not always trying to ruin you. A lot of the time, it is trying to preserve what it thinks will protect you, even if what it protects is too small for your calling. Even if what it protects is old pain, even if what it protects is a life you already know is suffocating you. This is why people can say they want change and still resist it with everything in them. Because the conscious mind can want expansion, while the subconscious mind is still loyal to familiarity. And familiarity has power, even when it is painful, even when it is limiting, even when it is embarrassing to admit that you keep circling the same mountain with different language every year. So here are the 3 signs of self-sabotage. First, you repeatedly stop when progress becomes visible. Not when things are impossible, when they become possible. That is important. Second, you rationalize delay with polished language. You call fear discernment. You call avoidance timing. You call inaction waiting for clarity, when deep down, the next step is already clear enough to take. Third, you keep recreating familiar disappointment. Different goal, same pattern. Different season, same collapse point. Those are the signs. You stop when it gets real. You disguise fear as logic. You recreate the same emotional outcome with new packaging. That is the recap. And until you deal with that honestly, you will keep blaming effort for a software issue. But once you see it, the next question becomes unavoidable. Where did the programming come from? Because your limitations did not all originate with you. A lot of what you call your mindset is actually an accumulation of inputs, voices, atmospheres, patterns, repeated messages. What you heard, what you watched, what you lived around, what got rewarded, what got punished. This is where the audit begins, because if your inner world is constantly being fed distorted material, of course the output keeps getting distorted. You cannot build a strong life on a contaminated stream of thought, and some of you have been consuming fear every day, then wondering why confidence feels unnatural. This is why auditing your inputs matters more than most people realize. People watch what they would never allow into their own house if it came in human form. Voices that constantly glorify panic, content that normalizes cynicism, media that feeds envy, outrage, confusion, emptiness, comparison, and low-grade emotional fatigue. Then they ask why their internal world feels heavy. Would you eat trash for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and expect your body to feel clean? Then why are you shocked that a steady diet of mental poison is producing spiritual fog? Your media diet matters just as much as your physical diet. Maybe more than you think, because food affects your body. Inputs shape your identity. If you wake up and immediately fill your mind with noise, drama, negativity, shallow comparison, and borrowed opinions, do not be surprised when your own signal gets weaker. Some of you have not been lacking intuition. You have been drowning it out. Too much content, too many voices, too much unfiltered access. You scroll before you think. You absorb before you discern. You let the algorithm disciple your attention, then wonder why your focus is fractured. That is not harmless. That is training. And the mind learns from repetition, even when you do not consciously agree with what it is hearing. Which brings me to a question you need to sit with. Whose voice is in your head? When you think about money, whose voice do you hear? When you consider taking a risk, whose warning rises first? When you imagine being seen, being powerful, being successful, being peaceful, being free, whose reaction echoes inside you? Because many of the thoughts you call your own were installed before you had the maturity to question them. A parent's fear, a teacher's limitation, a religious distortion, a bitter person's worldview, a family pattern that made struggle feel normal and expansion feel dangerous. And after enough repetition, those voices stop sounding external. They start sounding like you. That is what makes inherited limitations so sneaky. It hides in your tone. It hides in your reflexes. It hides in the speed with which you dismiss yourself. You say, "I'm just being realistic." But sometimes realism is just fear that has been living in your house for so long, It now has your name on it, and this is the twist you need to hear. You inherited most of your fears. Not every fear, but many of them. You inherited emotional responses, inherited ceilings, inherited assumptions about what kind of life is available to someone like you. You inherited beliefs about safety, money, love, visibility, power, rest, success, and identity. And because you inherited them early, you mistook them for facts. But inherited does not mean true. Inherited does not mean holy. Inherited does not mean permanent. Some of what shaped you was never meant to stay with you. That is why this audit matters. Because you cannot delete a script you are still unconsciously defending. So start noticing. What do you listen to every day? What do you consume when you are tired? What kind of people have repeated access to your inner world? What language keeps appearing in your self-talk? What emotional atmosphere are you normalizing? Pay attention to what enters you after midnight. Pay attention to what enters you first thing in the morning. Pay attention to the creators, friends, environments, conversations, and repeated phrases that leave you contracted instead of clear. There are inputs that expand you. There are inputs that shrink you. There are voices that sharpen you. There are voices that infect your confidence quietly and then disappear before you realize what changed. That is why the audit is not about becoming rigid. It is about becoming responsible. Because once you know what is feeding your limitations, you stop treating your mindset like a mystery. Now you have data. Now you have a trail. Now you can begin separating your real voice from the noise that trained you to doubt it. And once that separation starts, the next phase becomes possible. Now you can begin deleting the scripts themselves, not managing them, not decorating them with better language, deleting them at the root. That is where we are going next. You have seen the ceiling. You have started tracing the inputs. You have started noticing that some of what you call your mindset was installed long before you had the power to question it. Now the real work begins, because awareness is not deletion. Seeing the pattern is not the same as breaking it. And a lot of people stay stuck right here. They can name the problem. They can talk about childhood. They can explain their fear. They can describe their triggers with impressive accuracy. But the script is still running. The old sentence still fires the moment pressure rises. The old thought still enters like a default setting. The old reaction still takes over before they can build anything new. That is why this next part matters so much. You do not need a better excuse. You need a deletion protocol, because if you do not interrupt the thought at the level of repetition, it becomes identity. And once it becomes identity, you stop hearing it as a thought. You hear it as truth. That is where sabotage gets power. Not when the thought appears, when the thought goes unchallenged. So let us slow this down and make it usable. A negative thought is not just a sentence. It is usually a chain. It starts fast, quiet, almost invisible. Something happens. You make a mistake. Someone does not respond. An opportunity shows up. A risk becomes real. And then the thought appears. I always mess this up. This is probably going to fail. I am not the kind of person who can pull this off. People like me do not get to live like that. And because it feels familiar, you do not stop it. You follow it. Then the body reacts. The chest tightens. The energy drops. The motivation gets blurry. You lose momentum. Then behavior shifts. You delay. You numb out. You scroll. You shrink. You back away from the very thing that was asking for your courage. This is why you must learn how to track a negative thought. Not just feel it. Track it. The process is simple. First, catch the trigger. What just happened? What moment activated the thought? A mistake? A comparison? A request? A possibility? Second, identify the sentence. What exactly did your mind say? Not the whole emotional storm. The sentence. The script. The line that started the spiral. Third, observe the outcome. What did that thought make you do? Withdraw? Hesitate? Overthink? Abandon? That is the recap. Catch the trigger. Name the sentence. Observe the outcome. Because once you can trace the pattern, you stop being controlled by something you never slowed down enough to examine. This is where most people discover something important. The thoughts are not even original. They are recycled, predictable, old. The same 3 or 4 scripts wearing different clothes. It only feels powerful because it has been repeated so often. That is good news, because what is repeated can be interrupted. Now let me give you a practical tool, the cancel/clear technique. When the corrupted thought appears, you do not debate it for 10 minutes. You do not sit there letting it spread roots. You interrupt it fast. You say internally, or even out loud if you need to, cancel, clear. That is not magic language. It is a pattern break. It is you refusing automatic agreement. It is you drawing a line between the thought appearing and the thought being accepted. So the mind says, you are going to fail again. You answer, cancel, clear. That is an old script, not a final truth. The mind says, do not try, you will embarrass yourself. You answer, cancel, clear. Fear is speaking, not fact. The mind says, you always fall off. You answer, cancel, clear. I am not reinforcing that pattern. That interruption matters because thoughts feed on passive consent. They grow in silence. They strengthen through repetition. They become reality when you keep bowing to them like they have authority. But a thought is not authority just because it arrived with force. And this is where many people get nervous. Because once you start interrupting the old script, another question rises. What if it is true? What if I really am behind? What if I really do fail again? What if the fear is accurate? That question has trapped so many people. Not because it is wise, because it sounds wise. It feels intelligent to entertain every fearful possibility. It feels responsible to rehearse disaster before it happens. But the truth is, what if it is true, has kept many people in mental slavery because it forces you to live under suspicion of your own potential. So let us answer it correctly. Even if the fear points to a real weakness, agreement is not the solution. Awareness is. If the thought says you need more skill, then get more skill. If the thought says you need discipline, then build discipline. If the thought says this will require growth, then grow. But do not turn observation into identity. Do not let one area of weakness become a prophecy over your whole future. That is the difference. You can face truth without submitting to limitation. You can acknowledge where you need work without building your home inside a sentence that keeps you small. This is the deletion protocol. Interrupt the corrupted thought. Refuse passive agreement. Replace the script with something grounded and usable. Not fake positivity. Not shiny denial. Something believable enough to build from, which leads directly into the next phase. Because deletion alone is not enough. An empty space will get filled. If you remove the old script and install nothing new, the mind will default back to what is familiar. That is why some people can challenge a thought in the moment and still end up returning to the same ceiling a week later. They deleted, but they did not reinstall. And if you are going to run a true factory reset, you need both. You need removal and replacement. This is where affirmations often fail people. Not because words are useless, because random words do not override deeply rooted beliefs. Affirmations fail without belief. That is the twist. If someone has spent 20 years internally saying, I am unsafe, unseen, behind, not enough, not capable, then whispering one polished sentence into the mirror for 30 seconds will not automatically rewire the system. The baseline has to change. The default script has to change. The inner language you return to under pressure has to change. That means the replacement thought must be strong enough to hold weight. It must be believable enough for your nervous system to stop rejecting it. So instead of forcing, everything always works out perfectly for me. When your whole system resists it, you begin with a truer baseline. I can learn new outcomes. I do not need to obey every fearful thought. My old pattern is not my permanent identity. I can tolerate growth without retreating. I am safe enough to stay present in this new level. Those are baseline scripts. They are not fantasy. They are bridges. They help your mind move from corruption into stability. And you need a few of them ready before pressure hits. Because in the heat of the moment, you will not rise to your intentions. You will fall to your programming. So rehearse the new baseline now. Let it become more familiar. Let it become the sentence you return to when the old one tries to fire. That is how the reinstall begins. You are not trying to become delusional. You are becoming intentional. You are choosing what your mind is allowed to repeat. Let me make this practical with something simple. Morning framing. The first few minutes after you wake up are powerful because the mind is impressionable there. Yet so many people wake up and immediately hand their consciousness to panic, noise, and reaction. They check messages. They open social media. They let urgency set the tone. Then they wonder why they spend the rest of the day mentally behind. Try a different frame. Before the phone. Before the world. Before the inherited voices wake back up in full volume. Pause. And set the baseline. Today, I do not have to believe every fearful thought. Today, I move as the person I am becoming, not the script I am leaving. Today, I notice the old pattern without bowing to it. Today, I'm not running corrupted software. That is morning framing. You are not waiting to see what mindset the day gives you. You are choosing one. And that matters more than people realize, because every day your mind is being trained by repetition, either by default or by design. So let us recap the new baseline scripts clearly. I do not need to agree with every thought that enters. Old patterns can be observed without being obeyed. Growth can feel unfamiliar without being unsafe. I am allowed to become someone my old script does not recognize. That is the new baseline. And once that begins taking root, something interesting happens. The old ceiling starts losing authority, not all at once, but noticeably. The thought still comes, but it lands weaker. The fear still rises, but it does not run the whole room. The urge to self-sabotage appears, but now there is space between the urge and your response. That space is power. That space is where freedom begins. And in the next part, you are going to need that freedom, because right after the system starts changing, many people hit what feels like internal turbulence, a glitch phase. And if you do not understand it, you may mistake progress for failure. This is the part where many people panic, not because the reset is failing, because it is working. The old system starts losing control, and for a moment, your mind does not know how to act without its usual limits. That can feel unstable. That can feel strange. That can feel like something is wrong. But hear this clearly. Resistance does not always mean stop. Sometimes resistance means the script is losing its grip. That is the glitch phase. The moment when you start thinking differently, speaking differently, choosing differently, and your inner system pushes back because it is not yet comfortable with the new baseline. This is where people quit. They do the work. They catch the thoughts. They interrupt the old patterns. They start installing better language. And then suddenly they feel anxious, restless, emotionally off, mentally noisy, and they assume they must be doing something wrong. No, change feels threatening to the part of you that was trained to survive by staying the same. So ask yourself this: why does change feel like anxiety? Because your nervous system often confuses unfamiliar with unsafe. That is one of the deepest hidden mechanics of limitation. The old pattern may have been painful, but it was familiar. And familiarity creates predictability. Predictability creates a sense of control. So even when you begin moving towards something healthier, stronger, freer, your system may still react as if you are stepping into danger. That reaction is not proof that the new path is wrong. It is often proof that the old path had become automatic. This is why someone can finally begin charging more, speaking up, showing up, setting boundaries, applying for bigger opportunities, or creating with more boldness, and suddenly feel internal turbulence they did not feel when they were playing small. Because small was known, because hiding was rehearsed, because self-doubt was repeated so often it started feeling like home. And now you are leaving home, mentally, emotionally, identity level. Of course there is friction. Of course there is pushback. The mistake is assuming pushback means failure. It does not. Resistance means it is working. That is the twist. The discomfort is not always a warning. Sometimes it is the nervous system renegotiating what it thinks is safe. Sometimes it is the mind realizing the old script is no longer being obeyed. Sometimes it is the internal noise that happens right before a false ceiling collapses. So, what do you do during the glitch phase? You do not panic. You do not make a temporary feeling into a final conclusion. And you do not run back to the old script just because it feels more familiar. You ride it out with awareness. You tell the truth about what is happening. This feels unfamiliar, but unfamiliar is not the same as unsafe. My body is reacting to change, not necessarily to danger. I do not need to retreat just because the old pattern is protesting. That matters, because naming the phase correctly keeps you from mislabeling progress as breakdown. A lot of people have turned around at the exact moment they were finally rewriting the system. They got close. They felt the tension. Then they assumed the discomfort meant they should return to the old thought pattern, the old routine, the old identity, the old excuses. And that is how the ceiling stays in place. Not because it is strong, because people mistake transition pain for truth. So let us recap how to ride out the mental pushback. First, expect some turbulence. Do not act shocked when your mind resists new programming. Second, normalize the discomfort without bowing to it. You can feel the anxiety without agreeing with its message. Third, stay consistent with the new script long enough for it to become familiar. That is how you move through the glitch. Not by perfection, by repetition, by refusing to let one hard day become evidence that the reset is not real. And let me make this human. You start showing up for your goals again. You stop telling yourself the old defeated story. You take a brave step. Then later that night, your thoughts get loud. What if this is too much? What if I embarrass myself? What if I cannot sustain this version of me? That does not mean the system is broken. That means the old software is trying to reload. Your job is not to fear that moment. Your job is to recognize it, to stay with the new baseline anyway, to breathe, to ground, to keep going, because the more often you do that, the weaker the old script becomes. And now we reach the final stage, system optimization. This is where the reset stops being an event and becomes an environment, because you do not just want one breakthrough moment. You want a mind that stays clean enough to build from. You want your internal world operating with more clarity, more intention, more authority. That requires integration, and one of the most overlooked windows for integration is nighttime. The mind is highly suggestible before sleep, yet so many people end the day by feeding themselves stress, noise, comparison, doom, and unresolved emotional static. Then they wonder why they wake up mentally heavy. Nighttime integration means ending the day in a way that reinforces the identity you are building. It can be simple. Review the day. Notice where the old script tried to return. Notice where you interrupted it. Notice where you still slipped into familiar sabotage without shaming yourself for it. Then speak the reset back into your system. I am not who I was this morning. I caught what used to control me. I am building new defaults. My mind is learning a new level of safety. That is not fluff. That is reinforcement. Because what you repeat in quiet moments becomes powerful over time. And this is where the question gets personal. Who are you without this limit? Not with the inspirational version of yourself. Not with performance. Not with fantasy. Who are you when the old script no longer gets the final say? Who are you without the identity that always hesitates? Without the ceiling that told you not to go too high? Without the fear that made almost feel safer than fully? Some of you have been introducing yourselves through your limitation for so long that freedom feels abstract. I'm just inconsistent. I'm just an overthinker. I'm just bad with money. I'm just not confident. Be careful with that language. Every repeated sentence is a vote. And many people have been voting for an identity they no longer want. So begin speaking with more precision. You are not just the old glitch. You are not just the inherited fear. You are not just the pattern you have repeated under pressure. You are the person becoming conscious enough to interrupt it. That is a different identity. That is a different future. And once you start living from that place, the final truth reveals itself. The ceiling was made of paper. That is the twist. It felt like concrete because you hit it so many times. It felt permanent because it shaped your decisions for years. It felt real because your body reacted every time you got close to expanding. But once you trace the script, audit the inputs, interrupt the thought, reinstall the baseline, and survive the glitch phase, you begin realizing something almost shocking. A lot of what stopped you was never absolute. It was repeated, it was rehearsed, it was reinforced, and what was reinforced can be replaced. That does not mean growth is effortless now. It means the prison was weaker than it looked. It means the limit had power mainly because it stayed hidden. It means once you see the mechanism, you stop worshiping the ceiling. You stop calling it destiny. You stop treating it like truth. You start pushing through it. Tearing through it. Walking through it. And when that happens, life changes fast. Not because the world suddenly becomes perfect. Because your internal system stops sabotaging the very thing you prayed for. You stop collapsing right before the breakthrough. You stop negotiating with every fearful thought. You stop building your future on top of inherited limitations that were never truly yours. And with that reclaimed mental space, your energy returns. Your focus sharpens. Your goals stop feeling like emotional threats. You become more available to discipline because you are no longer spending all day fighting invisible code. You become more available to peace because your thoughts are no longer constantly working against your growth. That is optimization, not becoming robotic. Becoming aligned, becoming clear, becoming harder to internally sabotage. So let this be the moment you stop respecting the ceiling more than your potential. Let this be the moment you stop calling the old script your personality. Let this be the moment you take authority over what gets repeated in your mind. You do not need to stay loyal to corrupted software. You do not need to keep rebuilding your life inside inherited fear. You do not need to keep shrinking just because your old programming panics when expansion becomes real. Run the reset. Audit the voices. Delete the script. Install the new baseline. Ride out the glitch. And keep going until the mind that once trapped you becomes the mind that carries you. Because the limit was never as final as it felt. And the version of you waiting on the other side of this reset is not imaginary. It is the real you without the corruption. If this resonated and it gave language to what you have been fighting internally, stay close to this message and return to it when the old script tries to reinstall itself.